Long before Hillary Clinton testified at Benghazi hearings or battled Donald Trump, she defied the traditional role of First Lady to become a major political player.
Anyone who knows my husband and knows me knows that we've been having this conversation about what should be done in this country for more than 20 years. He's the one who's elected. He's the one who has to make the final decision. But I care about what he does, and I care about what happens, and I want to participate.
Her college classmates might have seen it coming. In 1969, Hillary took the stage as graduation speaker at Wellesley College, the first time a student was chosen to impart her words of wisdom to the 400 or so grads at commencement.
She is a major in political science and a candidate for the degree with honors. She is also cheerful, good-humored, good company, and a good friend to all of us. And it is a great pleasure to present to this audience Ms. Hillary Rodham.
It was a speech that foreshadowed her drive as First Lady.
Fear is always with us, but we just don't have time for it. Not now.
Decades later, she ruffled feathers with her refusal to sit on the sidelines.
Bill Clinton is running hard for the presidency, but his wife Hillary, an attorney and an advocate for various causes, seems to be running as hard as he is.
I suppose I could have stayed home and baked cookies and had teas, but what I decided to do was to fulfill my profession, which I entered before my husband was in public life.
She's less a spouse than a running mate. Her assertiveness makes some voters uncomfortable.
I feel that she's the power behind the throne.
I think she's a very aggressive woman. She's overly ambitious.
We elected Bill Clinton, not Hillary.
I think she has a little bit too much power for a president's wife.
The power that she has bothers me a lot.
You do have considerable influence, and some people say that there are Americans who don't feel totally comfortable with that because they're not sure how much influence you have. And after all, you were not elected. How much influence do you have?
I don't know that I have any more influence than anybody else who is an advisor to the president.
As First Lady, Clinton tried and failed to revamp the healthcare system.
I know from my own experiences and from the conversations I've been privileged to have with thousands of our fellow citizens across this country that something is wrong with our healthcare system and that it needs to be fixed.
The critics of HillaryCare were just as vocal as those of Obamacare. And Clinton was criticized for trying to engineer her health care reform plan without input from Congress.
Health care reform had been on life supports for weeks. Today, it fell to Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell to officially pull the plug. Under constant attack from critics, support for the package dropped steadily. Opposition increased. Key players say everyone is to blame for the death of health reform: the president, Mrs. Clinton, Democratic and Republican leaders in Congress.
Your husband has had a tough time lately in terms of the public perception. There are some people who believe, had you not been in charge of health care, some of these embarrassing fiascos wouldn't have happened.
I am very committed to doing what he's asked me to do, which is to work on health care. And, you know, a lot of these other matters are ones that, you know, things happen. You know, people make mistakes.
She also took her policymaking ambitions abroad, denouncing human rights abuses against women at a 1995 UN meeting in Beijing.
If there is one message that echoes forth from this conference, let it be that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights once and for all.
But Clinton's time as First Lady was also often marred by controversy, and her detractors covered everything from the political to the personal.
With all of this talk of subpoenas, a key White House resignation over the weekend, a Republican suggesting impeachment, the president vigorously defending his wife, the core questions remain tonight. What is under investigation and why?
The committee's report makes it clear this administration believed evasion and obstruction were more important than the truth. The administration was involved in a highly orchestrated effort to keep the facts from the American people in the intricate web of deceit and abuse of power that is Whitewater.
I just wanted to comment that there has been one central figure that has been a major player in all three phases of this investigation, from the Vince Foster hours after his death to the Washington investigation to the events in Arkansas. And that one person has been Hillary Rodham Clinton.
There was the Whitewater scandal, which led to an investigation by a special prosecutor into a series of real estate transactions long before the Clintons were in the White House.
The question now, Was it ethical for Hillary Clinton and her law firm to represent the SNL before a state regulator appointed by her husband?
Do you know of any money that could have gone from Madison to the Whitewater Project or to any of your husband's political campaigns?
Absolutely not. I do not.
And of course, there was her ever-scrutinized decision to stand by her husband, despite his affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
So if what you have heard is something you can believe, and if what the president has told the nation is the whole truth and nothing but the truth,
right,
then you'd have to agree that this is the worst and most damaging smear of the 20th century.
The great story here, for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it, is this vast right-wing conspiracy that has been conspiring against my husband since the day he announced for president.
In a deposition in January, I was asked questions about my relationship with Monica Lewinsky. While my answers were legally accurate, I did not volunteer information. Indeed, I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky that was not appropriate.
She has been silent about this topic for months. Now Hillary Clinton is speaking out about the state of her marriage. The First Lady blamed her husband's problems on childhood abuse, saying everybody has some dysfunction in their family. They have to deal with it. You just don't walk away if you love someone. You help the person.
Democratic pollster Mark Mellman says Mrs. Clinton's popularity has skyrocketed as America watches her handle a scandal that would tear most families apart.
She's smiling, she's holding his hand. I mean, that takes a lot. I have a great deal of respect for Hillary Clinton.
Hillary is hurting right now, and she needs all the support that she can get.
Based on what you know now, 5 years after coming to Washington, the personal attacks, the political attacks, do you sit home at night and think it's worth it?
It is worth it. Now, do I wish that we didn't live in a time where people were so malicious and evil-minded? Of course, but you know, that's human nature. So you take the good with the bad, and the good has far, far outweighed any bad at all.
Taking criticism from all sides as an unconventional First Lady forced Hillary Clinton to develop thick skin, something she's drawing on in 2016 as she becomes the first woman to be nominated by a major party for president.
At the Dugal Greenhouse at the Brooklyn Navy Yard in Brooklyn, New York for the CNN Democratic presidential debate. We've come to Brooklyn just 5 days before the New York presidential primary, a very important contest for the Democrats with an enormous number of delegates at stake. We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer, and I'll moderate tonight's debate. Joining me in the questioning, Era Lewis, political anchor for New York One Time Warner Cable, our partner in this debate, and CNN chief political correspondent, Dana Bash. Brooklyn has personal meaning for the candidates who both have been New Yorkers at one time or another in their lives. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the candidates. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. Ladies and gentlemen, the Democratic candidates for President of the United States.
Well, it is true that now that the spotlight is pretty bright here in New York, some things have been said, and Senator Sanders did call me unqualified. I've been called a lot of things in my life. That was a first. And then he did say that he had to question my judgment. Well, the people of New York voted for me twice to be their senator from New York. And President Obama trusted my judgment enough to ask me to be Secretary of State for the United States. So, look, we have disagreements on policy. There's no doubt about it. But if you go and read, which I hope all of you will before Tuesday, Senator Sanders' long interview with the New York Daily News, talk about judgment and talk about the kinds of problems he had answering questions about even his core issue, breaking up the banks. When asked, he could not explain how that would be done. And when asked about a number of foreign policy issues, he could not answer about Afghanistan, about Israel, about counterterrorism, except to say if he'd had some paper in front of him, maybe he could. I think you need to have the judgment on day one to be both president and commander-in-chief.
Senator. And let's talk about judgment. And let us talk about the worst foreign policy blunder in the modern history of this country. I led the opposition to that war. Secretary Clinton voted for that war. Let's talk about judgment. Let's talk about super PACs and 501c4s, money which is completely undisclosed. Where does the money come from? Do we really feel confident about a candidate saying that she's going to bring change in America when she is so dependent on big money interest? I don't think so.
Well, let me say.
Secretary, let him finish.
Okay.
Thirdly, we have got to understand that in America we should be thinking big, not small.
Thank you.
We need to join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all people as a right. My view, not her view.
Thank you, Senator. Secretary.
Well, make no mistake about it. This is not just an attack on me, it's an attack on President Obama. President Obama, you know, let me tell you why. You may not like the answer, but I'll tell you why. President Obama had a super PAC when he ran. President Obama took tens of millions of dollars from contributors. And President Obama was not at all influenced when he made the decision to pass and sign Dodd-Frank, the toughest regulations on Wall Street in many a year. So this is a phony attack that is designed to raise questions when there is no evidence or support, to undergird the insinuations that he is putting forward in these attacks.
Thank you, Secretary.
Senator Sanders, you've consistently criticized Secretary Clinton. You've consistently criticized Secretary Clinton for accepting money from Wall Street. Can you name one decision that she made as senator that shows that she favored banks because of the money she received?
Sure. The obvious decision is when the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior of Wall Street brought this country into the worst economic downturn since the Great Recession, the Great Depression of the 30s, when millions of people lost their jobs and their homes and their life savings. The obvious response to that is that you got a bunch of fraudulent operators and that they have got to be broken up. That was my view way back, and I introduced legislation to do that. Now, Secretary Clinton was busy giving speeches to Goldman Sachs for $225,000 a speech. So the proper response, in my view, is we should break them up, and that's what my legislation does.
Well, you can tell, Dana, he cannot come up with any example because there is no example. And it is important. It's always important. It may be inconvenient, but it's always important to get the facts straight. I stood up against the behaviors of the banks when I was a senator. I called them out on their mortgage behavior. I also was very willing to speak out against some of the special privileges they had under the tax code. When I went to the Secretary of State office, the President Obama, led the effort to pass the Dodd-Frank bill. That is the law. Now, this is our 9th debate. In the prior 8 debates, I have said, we have a law. You don't just say, we're upset about this, I'm upset about it. You don't just say, go break them up. You have a law because we are a nation of laws.
Thank you,
So
Madam
I
Secretary.
support Dodd-Frank, but I have consistently said that's not enough. We've got to include the shadow banking
Senator
sector.
Sanders.
Secretary Clinton called them out. Oh, my goodness. They must have been really crushed by this. And was that before or after you received huge sums of money by giving speaking engagements behind them? So they must have been very, very upset by what you did. Look, here is the difference. And here is the clear difference. These banks, in my view, have too much power. They have shown themselves to be fraudulent organizations endangering the well-being of our economy. If elected president, I will break them up. We've got legislation to do that. End of discussion.
Secretary Clinton, if I may, Senator Sanders keeps bringing up the speeches that you gave to Goldman Sachs. So I'd like to ask you, you've said that you don't want to release the transcripts until everybody does it. But if there's nothing in those speeches that you think would change voters' minds, why not just release the transcripts and put this whole issue to bed?
You know, I'm not saying that Senator Sanders did something untoward when he voted to deregulate swaps and derivatives, but the fact is he did. And that contributed to the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which started the cascade in the Great Recession.
Senator Sanders, 1 second, please. Secretary Clinton, the question was about the transcripts of the speeches to Goldman Sachs. Why not release them?
I have said, look, there are certain expectations when you run for president. This is a new one, and I've said if everybody agrees to do it, because there are speeches for money on the other side, I know that. But I will tell you this, there is a long-standing expectation that everybody running release their tax returns, and you can go to my website and see 8 years of tax returns, and I've released 30 years of tax returns. And I think every candidate, including Senator Sanders and Donald Trump, should do the same.
Secretary Clinton, we're going to get to the tax returns later, but just to put a button on this, you're running now for the Democratic nomination.
Right.
And it is your Democratic opponent and many Democratic voters who want to see those transcripts. It's not about the Republicans at this point.
Let's set the same standard for everybody. When everybody does it, okay, I will do it. But let's set and expect the same standard on tax returns. Everybody does it, and then we move forward.
Thank you.
Well, let me respond. Secretary Clinton, you just heard her. Everybody else does it, she'll do it. I will do it. I am going to release all of the transcripts of the speeches that I gave on Wall Street behind closed doors. Not for $225,000, not for $2,000, not for 2 cents. There were no speeches. And second of all, of course, we will release our taxes. Jane does our taxes. We've been a little bit busy lately. You'll excuse us. But we will, Senator, we will get them out.
He voted for the most important NRA priority, namely giving immunity from liability to gun makers and dealers, something that is at the root of a lot of the problems that we are facing. Then he doubled down on that in the New York Daily News interview when asked whether he would support the Sandy Hook parents suing to try to do something to rein in the advertising of the AR-15, which is advertised to young people as being a combat weapon, killing on the battlefield. He said they didn't deserve their day in court. I could not disagree more. And finally, this is the only industry in America, the only one that has this kind of special protection. We hear a lot from Senator Sanders about the greed and recklessness of Wall Street. And I agree. We've got to hold Wall Street accountable.
Thank you.
Well, what about the greed and recklessness of the gun manufacturers and dealers in America?
Okay. Well, the only problem is, Wolf, she didn't answer your question. You asked her whether she thought that Vermont was responsible for a lot of the gun violence. And you made the point that what she said was totally absurd.
I asked her, are you seriously blaming Vermont and implicitly Senator Sanders for New York's gun violence? She said no, but go ahead.
So why did she put out that statement?
I put it out.
A statement because, excuse me, I think I'm responding.
Please, go ahead.
Now, earlier this year, a South Carolina voter told your daughter, Chelsea, quote, I think a lot of African Americans want to hear, you know what, we made a mistake. Chelsea said she's heard you apologize, but went on to say that if the voter hadn't heard it, then, quote, it's clearly insufficient. Do you regret your advocacy for the crime bill?
Well, look, I supported the crime bill. My husband has apologized. He was the president who actually signed it. Senator Sanders voted for it. I'm sorry for the consequences that were unintended and that have had a very unfortunate impact on people's lives. I've seen the results of what has happened in families and in communities. That's why I chose to make my very first speech a year ago on this issue, Errol, because I want to focus the attention of our country and to make the changes we need to make. And I also want people, especially I want white people to recognize that there is systemic racism. It's also in employment, it's in housing, but it is in the criminal justice system as well.
Senator Sanders, earlier this week at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, you called out President Clinton for defending Secretary Clinton's use of the term super predator back in the 90s when she supported the crime bill. Why did you call him out?
Because it was a racist term and everybody knew it was a racist term. Look.
Senator Sanders, in 1997, you said this about NATO. You said, quote, it is not the time to continue wasting tens of billions of dollars helping to defend Europe, let alone assuming more than our share of any costs associated with expanding NATO. Do you still feel that way?
Well, what I believe, if my memory is correct here, we spend about 75% of the entire cost of the military aspect of NATO. Given the fact that France has a very good healthcare system and free public education, college education for their people. The UK has a good national health service, and they also provide fairly reasonable higher education. You know what? Yeah, I do believe that the countries of Europe should pick up more of the burden for their defense. Yes, I do.
And just following up, Senator Sanders, Donald Trump also argues that NATO is unfair economically to the U.S. because America pays a disproportionate share. So how is what you say about NATO and your proposal different than his?
Well, you got to ask Trump.
We've had 8 debates before. This is our 9th. We've not had one question about a woman's right to make her own decisions about reproductive health care. Not one question. And in the meantime, we have states, governors, doing everything they can to restrict women's rights. We have a presidential candidate by the name of Donald Trump saying that women should be punished, and we are never asked about this. And to be complete in my concern, Senator Sanders said, with respect to Trump, it was a distraction. I don't think it's a distraction. It goes to the heart of who we are as women, our rights, our autonomy, our ability to make our own decisions. And we need to be talking about that and defending Planned Parenthood from these outrageous attacks.
Your response. You have been in Congress for over a quarter of the century, and there as an independent, not a Democrat. Now you're seeking the Democratic nomination, but Secretary Clinton has suggested that she's not even sure you are a Democrat. Are you?
Well, why would I be running for the Democratic nomination to be President of the United States? But here is a good point. You know, in virtually all of the general election matchup polls between Trump and Secretary Clinton and Trump and Bernie Sanders, in almost all of those polls, I do better than Secretary Clinton. Both in the CNN poll, I was 20 points ahead of Trump. I think Secretary Clinton was 12 points. And you know why? Because, in fact, a whole lot of people, this may be a shock to the Secretary, but there are a whole lot of independents in this country.
Senator Sanders.
And we are not going to win the White House based on just long-term Democratic votes. We have got to reach out to independents, and I think I am well qualified to do that.
Senator Sanders.
I am in this race as a Democrat. I have raised millions of dollars for my colleagues in the United States Senate to help them get elected. I will do everything that I can to open the Democratic Party to the young people who are flocking into our campaigns.
Senator Sanders, there are 3 months now between now and the Democratic convention. Your campaign manager says that you will absolutely take the fight to the floor if neither you nor Secretary Clinton clinches the nomination with pledged delegates alone. Do you vow to take this fight to Philadelphia no matter what?
I think we're going to win this nomination, to tell you the truth. Look, let me acknowledge what is absolutely true. Secretary Clinton cleaned our clock in the Deep South. No question about it. We got murdered there. That is the most conservative part of this great country. That's the fact. But you know what? We're out of the Deep South now. And we're moving up. We got here, we're going to California, we got a number of large states there. And having won 7 out of the last 8 caucuses and primaries, having a level of excitement and energy among working people and low-income people, doing better against Donald Trump and the other Republicans in poll after poll than Secretary Clinton is, yeah, I believe that we're going to win this nomination, and I believe we're going to obliterate Donald Trump or whoever the Republican candidate is.
Well, let me say this.
Secretary Clinton, go ahead.
I think it's important for people out there watching this tonight to know that I also have a considerable lead in pledged delegates. And my lead in pledged delegates is actually wider than Barack Obama's lead was over me. And in addition to winning states in the Deep South, we won Florida, Texas, Arizona, Massachusetts, Ohio, Illinois, North Carolina, Missouri. And so I think where we stand today is that we are, in this campaign, very confident and optimistic. But it all comes down to reaching every single voter. I'm not taking anything for granted, or any voter, or any place. So I'm going to work my heart out here in New York until the polls close on Tuesday. I'm going to work in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware, and Maryland, all the way through California. And when we end up with the number of delegates we need, we will unite the party and have a unified convention
Senator,
that will go on to the general election with.
The reason I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, the son of an immigrant who came to this country from Poland at the age of 17 without a nickel in his pocket, never made a whole lot of money, but was a very proud American, because this country gave him and my mom the opportunity to send their kids to college. I believe that this country has enormous potential if we have the guts to take on the big money interests who dominate our economic and political life. And I disagree with Secretary Clinton in the belief that you can get money from Wall Street, that you can get money for a super PAC from powerful special interests, and then at the end of the day, do what has to be done for the working families of this country. I just don't accept that. What I believe is that this country, if we stand together and not let the Trumps of the world divide us up, can guarantee health care to all people as a right, can have paid family and medical leave, can make public colleges and universities tuition-free, can lead the world in transforming our energy system and combating climate change, can break up the large financial institutions, can demand that the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes. And we can do that when millions of people stand up, fight back, and create a government that works for all of us, not just the 1%. That is what the political revolution is about. That is what this campaign is about. And with your help, we're going to win here in New York. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Clinton.
Don't worry about them. Let them rot. Look, it's a Bernie person. It's a Bernie. Hello, Bernie. Hey, Bernie, get your people in line, Bernie.